today I have, yay! Today I have Linden Vazey with me. Hi, Linden. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for inviting me along. Love these
Oh,
conversations.
first of all, I want to introduce you. Linden is a friend, a colleague, a client. She's also a student of life. I would call you a truth seeker first and foremost.
Very true.
You've also worked in some of the biggest firms in the world. We call it the top four. You've worked in Ernst & Young as a manager for a number of years, guiding leaders and teams. You've worked with parents as well over the last couple of years. And I know that you're up to some new, interesting, and creative ideas about leadership
Mhm.
that we'll talk about as well. So thank you for being here. Welcome.
I feel very welcome. So grateful to be part of the community that you're growing. I think it's just such important work and important conversations to have.
Oh, thank you. The heart and soul of this conversation is going to be what it means to be authentic, heart-centered leaders in, times of crises and beyond. I feel like you've been on such an incredible journey in your own life. I'd like to hear your definition or your meaning of some of these things that we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. An anchor, I guess, that I've used to think about the journey so far
Yeah.
is a period of self-discovery. I think that truth-seeking part that you mentioned is absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
Because I think growing up, I really looked outside of myself to try and understand who I was. So I
Mm,
looked to find out from my parents, from my teachers, from friends, from boyfriends, from work colleagues.
yep.
Who am I? Am
Who
I
am
am I
I?
good enough at what I do? What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And
Yeah.
really tried to make myself into whatever it was that these different people wanted me to be acceptable, to be okay, to be the good girl, whatever you want to call it. So, I mean, the
Mm,
first part of my life was really about navigating all the needs and demands of these different people and different roles and different expectations and thinking that that's how to live.
yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
then I guess, the more of these things that stack up over time, many of the roles start to conflict. And so it was
Mm,
particularly when my role as mother, the kind of mother that I wanted to be,
mm-hmm.
conflicted with the kind of successful career person that I wanted to be, is
Yeah.
when things started kind of falling apart because it was like,
Mm,
well, you can't win at one without losing at the other. There was this real process of just like deconstructing reality in a way,
yeah.
because I had this crazy, identity, which was this chameleon,
Yeah.
and then it was the question was really like, actually, who am I? And so that's what
Yeah.
started the seeking and all of the, watching of different videos to try and figure out what was true for me and what wasn't true for me. And looking
Yeah.
at different teachers, like Brene Brown was a huge one, Tony Robbins was a huge one, Simon
Yes.
Sinek loved his stuff. And just trying to
Yes.
figure out based on these teachers, like, what do I actually believe? Who do I want to be? And why
Mm-hmm.
can't I show up as that way?
Yes. You raise such an important point because knowing who you are is a very important one, and it's an exciting one. The real adventure, if you will, it begins when we embark on the process of living the things that we've now known.
Mm. Absolutely. So hard, especially when you've spent so much of your time gauging other people's wants from you and being that way. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
it's like, I actually need to show up as somebody else because that's who I really am.
Yeah.
And what is it going to mean for my relationship with this person? Is it
Yeah.
going to upset them? Is it going to disappoint them? Um,
Mm.
what is it going to change?
Yeah, an important conversation to have in this journey is this fear of losing other people's love. Um,
Absolutely.
it's like, what if I lose these relationships or friendships, or the people that I love will see me differently if all of a sudden I show up as myself? And so tell me a little bit about that. It's like, why embark on this process if it means you could lose the love of other people? Why do this?
Yeah, I guess it just got to the point where it felt too painful
Mm,
to continue to be inauthentic. Like
Yeah.
there was this little voice in the
Yeah.
background
Yeah.
who was telling me, like, I'm really tired, or,
Mm.
I don't want to do such and such anymore, or
Yeah.
it feels terrible when
Mm-hmm.
you operate in a particular way, or, there's the little voice which is kind of in the background,
Yeah.
which for so long I kind of squashed
Yeah.
and was just like, no, no, no. I know what's best. I know what it is to be successful. I know what it is to please people and be
Yeah.
the good wife, the good mother,
Yeah.
the hard worker, the successful person in all of these
Yes.
areas of life.
Yes.
So just shush shush, and I've got the. But what happened is that after a while, instead of a voice, it's pain in the body.
Mm.
Instead of a voice,
Mm-hmm.
it's headaches, and just slowly but surely things would shut down.
Yeah. 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 And so what I'm hearing you say is that, this idea of ignoring that voice leading to harmony or leading to us going on about our days is a bit of a falsehood. It sort of creeps up on you.
Absolutely. There's a cost, there's a hidden cost that
Mm.
we don't want to openly acknowledge.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, I want to encourage, like, to anybody who's listening, to be mindful of those moments, like, where you can sort of hear that inner voice slowly making herself known. When you think that you can just keep going and living that
Mm.
mask, like you talked about. We'll sort of go a little bit deeper, but worked in a corporate space. And so I want to talk about how that environment has impacted the way that you've approached this, just some of the things you've been aware of because of that environment.
Absolutely. It's actually been really fun. I've been reflecting on my career, and at university, I was very idealistic.
Yeah,
And I did a really great program which included change management and transformational leadership. And so it was talking about all these amazing things like learning organizations and these
yeah,
models of leadership, which were very vulnerable and very transparent and very much about bringing people along on the journey. And I
yeah.
was just like, yes, this is exactly the kind of leadership that I want to be. This is so exciting. I can't
Yeah.
wait to get out into the workforce and really be this kind of leader.
Mm,
And subsequently, in role after role after role, the
mm,
managers that I had were male, they were very masculine, they were very competitive. And the message that I got when I would be very transparent about not only my strengths, but also my weaknesses or my
yeah.
concerns
Mm,
was, that's not how you play the game.
mm,
It was, sell your strengths. It was, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody about your weaknesses, your fears, or uncertainties.
yeah.
That's not how you be successful.
Yeah.
Really focus on what the value that you add, and really just focus on the good. And it's almost like, when I think about it now, there's so much language in business which is metaphors around war or around battle.
Yes.
And it's almost as if you don't want to give your enemy any weapons that they can use against you.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and I've been reflecting on this a lot, and I can see a real pattern showing up with a number of people who really reinforced the point for me, is that
Mm-hmm.
if you want to be successful in business, there's a kind of way that you need to be. And
Yeah.
so I learned and I adapted as I did, and
Yeah.
showed up as the best and the hardest working little overachiever that you can
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah. 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 And what's the impact of that? Not every environment, but that, there's a predominance of being in work environments where there is that language of using battle terms, in between your teams and in yourself.
Yeah, well, it's been subconsciously, if I can't express
Mm-hmm.
things like, areas which I may not be that comfortable, where I may need extra growth and development, or concerns that I have about risks or potential issues in a project, then
Yeah.
how can I be honest about,
Mm,
if I made a mistake? How
yeah.
can I be honest about things where I'm not confident that I'm going to be able to do my best. And so it becomes an insidious way of letting the person know that you're on your own.
Yes.
You sink or swim individually,
Mm-hmm.
because there's nobody that you can come to for that kind of guidance or support. It's like nobody else has your back.
Yep.
Because you can't come and talk about any of this stuff. People don't either. You get the feeling that people don't want to hear it just because of this language that people are using about the game, how the game is played.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely. The world has seen its fair share of uh, crises in leadership in
Mm.
2020 alone, and what like when you look at the world space, or when you look at the way some leaders are answering these questions, what do you
Mm.
see is missing in leadership that has been important for you?
Humanity, just
Yeah.
that kernel of like core humanity of
Yeah.
we're all people, we're all imperfect, we all do the best that we can, we all make the
Mm,
best decisions with the information that we have.
yeah.
We're all capable of mistakes,
Yeah.
and we want to be part of making things right, doing things better,
Mm-hmm.
and even just that humanity of being able to just say I don't know, and
Yeah.
I should be able to ask other people who've had more experience and um, more mentors. We should be able to look to our
Yeah.
managers and to other senior leaders as
Yeah.
mentors, as guides.
Yeah.
And it really, without that common humanity and without being able to show up as humans, if we're
Mm-hmm.
needing to always maintain the mask and maintain the armor,
Yeah.
then there's no trust. So
Yeah.
if we can't trust each other, then how are we
Mm,
really going to collaborate? How are we really going to solve important problems?
yeah.
It's not going to
Absolutely.
happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I have had multiple conversations about this, and this also is reflective of like thought leaders in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you think of like even Patrick Lencioni, he
Mm.
looks at the five dysfunctions of a team, and trust is at the very bottom. That's the first one.
Absolutely.
Focusing on the armor starts to create dysfunction when we're actually believing it to create an illusion of control and safety.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
that is the exact catch-22, that in order to feel safe, we want to be armored, but
Yes.
in order to have a satisfying and fulfilling experience at work where we can just fully be ourselves, we have
Mm-hmm.
to put the armor away.
Yeah. 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 And let's go a little bit deeper about that. It's like when we look at the way things have been done for the last, let's say, a century, a little more than a century, probably closer to 1,000 years. There has been a deep resistance to take the armor off. What do you think is the deeper fear? What is the fear about taking the armor off and being seen and seeing other people at work in these relationships that we have?
Mm. Well, if I think about it with my manager's hat on,
Yes.
if there are dysfunctions going on in my own team and I need to
Mm-hmm.
have conversations,
Yeah.
sometimes those conversations can get really vulnerable
Yeah.
because people create these kind of dysfunctional patterns at work. They're wearing their armor, and that means that, they might be gossiping, or they might be blaming others, or they might be, their work might be delayed, or whatever the thing is that's going on.
Yeah.
And when you actually really sit with somebody and help them to feel safe, and you really listen and really ask them
Mm,
what's going on, they
mm-hmm.
might tell you some things that would make you feel really uncomfortable if you weren't already comfortable enough in your own skin. They
Yeah.
might tell you about situations which are going on in their marriage. They might tell you about things which are going on with their children or wider family.
Yeah.
And if you haven't already kind of done some of your own work and feel comfortable in those conversations,
Yeah.
then the vulnerability of that is going to create its own pain and its own reaction in my body as a manager.
Yeah.
So I have to admit that I had a certain threshold
Yeah.
before I dove into my own stuff. But I was much more comfortable with helping solve surface level problems.
Yeah.
Then after I had done my own internal work and understood some of my own shame and my own vulnerability and my own wounds,
Yeah.
and then I was able to sit with people in a much calmer space to be able to just hear whatever is coming up and know that it's their experience. You know, it's nothing to do with me or anybody else. It's their experience.
Yeah.
And it's not for me to solve, but just by listening, by being a presence and by understanding what's going on for them, it can really help to diffuse some of the tension so that they feel safer and more relaxed, so that they can then come up with whatever the solution needs to be going forward.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So many gems in just what you said. I sort of heard three things, namely the value of being present with somebody without needing to have the answers for them. And leading to the second thing, which is empowering them to come up with solutions, themselves, instead of you being there to fix whatever's going on.
Absolutely. Because once we get past the fear, the uncertainty, the doubt, whatever's going on for us, I think most people actually have the answers.
Yes.
It's just helping remove the obstacle to them seeing the truth or having the answer.
Yeah, beautiful. And that leads to like the third thing I picked up, and that's sort of the heart of the work that you and I do, which is for the leader and for the practitioner to really have done their inner work, to be in that space of service and sort of unconditional presence for the person that they're serving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's such a gift, and it's really hard. It's absolutely, it is so challenging. But to be able to just be totally okay with whatever somebody is bringing with you, for them to know that you are a safe person, like no matter what it is, that it'll never be too difficult or too weird or too much. To just be able to bring in, it's all okay.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I want to sort of look at not a counter argument, but something that's often raised in this conversation, which is to look at the business cost and benefit of approaching leadership in this way. Like there's sometimes an argument that this is a soft skill, call it emotional intelligence, or looking at some of these skills of bringing empathy to these conversations is a soft skill. So I would love an example. It could be an experience that you've had where you've seen that impact that it can make in terms of the quality of a work or a team, and if you want to share that.
Yeah, sure. I can think of a team that I worked with earlier in the year, and they have quite a challenging environment in that they're an internal team within an organisation, so their clients are within the same organisation they work. But there's a huge amount of demand and a very fast pace. So people expect as soon as they request something that it's going to be back to them, very quickly, or that this team will help resolve problems that are going on, so that things can continue moving on. So this team had worked as a group of individuals for quite some time. So they were accustomed to each being responsible for a certain thing, and they didn't really collaborate or work together very much. And the result of that was that some people were really overloaded, other people didn't have as much work on, but they considered themselves busy, even though they weren't actually very busy. It created kind of an internal conflict where there was resentment and misunderstandings between the people. And so I started coaching one of the more senior women on that group. And through that process of like understanding kind of some of her own patterns and how she was reacting to others, she was able to see a lot more clearly about what the actual fundamental need was, and what the need was to create trust in the team, so that the team was more collaborative, so that the team could talk more about what was on their plate, what they needed, what help they could offer to each other. And she, once she'd kind of done some of her own work and was actually feeling a lot clearer and she had more energy, she took that back to her team and guided them through a process of how they could come together to be a more high-performing team.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing was that they had just gone through the process. They had established themselves as a team, like they had a team charter, so it really defined how they were going to show up. They had a clear understanding of their objectives. They had a system which they could use to so that requests were all in one place and they could see who was allocated to who, they could report on it. Everything just became much more transparent, much more efficient, and they had just got this up and running before New Zealand went into lockdown.
Wow.
So even though they were working, remotely distributed in different locations, it didn't matter because they already had this way of working as a team and these tools and objectives. Everything was very clear to them. So they've come through the lockdown period really very well.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. And yeah, what I'm hearing there is we're talking about getting real about what it actually takes to have high-performing teams.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, if that is what you want, then if we're working with people, if this is about people management, then let's get real about what that really involves.
Definitely. And if somebody is willing and open and they really want to find a solution, then they're motivated to do this relatively rapidly. So things can happen much sooner than you think. I think it was, I think Brene Brown says, like, you either spend a reasonable amount of time dealing with people's fears, uncertainty, and doubts, or you spend an unreasonable amount of time dealing with all of the issues that arise because of it.
Yeah.
And I think that is so true. Like, there is such a huge return on human energy, if you want to call that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in terms of how these resources are spent within organizations and teams. I've seen this in my own experience, with my clients, and sometimes you and I have talked about this too. Like, there are like authenticity, like heart-centered ninjas in certain organizations. And they don't feel fully safe, or they feel like they have to sort of downplay or undermine that desire or impulse to be authentic and encourage other people to be authentic. What would you tell me, like, for somebody who's listening, that can be a heart-centered, man, woman, anybody, who is wondering how to express or how to make room for that authenticity in their various relationships?
So many places to go with this question. I'm just trying to figure out where to start, really.
Yeah, it's a big one, right?
It's a big one. Well, let's start where I started, because for me it was a process of like starting close to the heart, which was just starting with myself, and then slowly like growing and increasing the sphere of who I shared my authenticity with. So I think if you want to be able to show up at work in your authenticity and feel a sense of your own internal safety and your own internal groundedness, you need to start with getting that in yourself first. So being able to figure out for yourself what your own truth is, what your own boundaries are, what your passions and desires and likes are. Because for me, that my own passions and desires had been something that I had repressed and ignored. So it was just like everything I needed to basically redefine for myself, like who I was and what I enjoyed and what was pleasurable for me and how did I want to spend my time. And from there, once I had an understanding of that, then I needed to speak and interact differently with my husband and with my children. So it was starting to bring them more into the authentic conversations and being honest and open with them. And it wasn't until I had a very good grounding in my family that I could then speak to my mum a bit differently, or show up with friends differently. And it was a tough journey for me, and I think it was at least 2 years
Yeah.
until I finally said, like, okay, I'm going to give it a try, showing up as my real self at work.
Yeah.
Let's do it as like a bit of an experiment and just see what happens and see what kind of feedback I get.
Yeah.
And it was a big step, like a really huge step to be able to do that, because it felt like there's, like, sure, in your home environment and with your relatives, people love you.
Yes.
And so you've got that to hang on to.
Yeah.
Like, even if they don't like me, they have to love me because
They
we're
have to love
family.
me. Yes. Yeah.
But nobody at work has to love you.
No.
And depending on how they perceive you, perception is very much reality.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's so many times that I can think of where people were perceived a certain way, and then it just feeds how they're interacted with, which means that they are sidelined to an extent, or they don't get the same opportunities as others, and the bias just kind of feeds on itself. And then, yeah, it puts people in really difficult positions. And I really didn't want to make anybody unhappy. And so there was that I needed to overcome first.
Yeah.
Like, guess what, Linden? You're going to surprise some people.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think we've talked about this before, which is that art of disappointing others.
Absolutely. Disappointing, surprising, and for very many people, and I think the vast majority of people were pleasantly surprised and mostly relieved.
Yeah. How so? Give me an example of that.
Like, I think of so many people who get the message that this is an individual game, that you are responsible for your own success, you're responsible for your own career advancement.
Yeah.
Here are your KPIs, you are responsible for meeting them, whatever the message is.
Yeah.
And for somebody else to just be a normal person who is actually concerned about you, or who really wants to know the range of things that you're working on and how you're going, and listening to whatever it is that you have to share. Like, that's a very heavy burden for most people. And if you're open to listening, then they can feel like they can just put that shield or that armor, that mask, that burden down for a moment, and just like, oh, thank goodness, another human being that I can speak to, that I don't feel I need to fear or have this kind of power distance relationship with.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And what I keep hearing in your words, it's almost like it's an inside out process, from leadership to being yourself to expressing who you are and living all these passions. It all starts from the inside out. And yeah, so the work first is within.
Yeah, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I love that. And part of the myth is this idea of the high functioning, multifaceted, very busy woman. Just this idea of whether it's the pandemic that's finally, introducing this new pace of being, but whether you could speak to that a little bit about this myth that we have, the corporate myth of being this high functioning, very busy people.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I carried that as a proud badge of honor for quite some time.
Busy.
Yes. And that was, the question. There's the default question at work of how are you? And there's the default answer of so busy, or so much on, so stressed out, whatever else.
Yes.
And this is, there was a lot of pieces to that when I deconstructed that myth, as you call it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the key pieces to it is just wanting to be important.
Yeah.
Wanting to be valued. And so for me, the more that I could do for other people, so the more projects I could take on, the more I could be the go-to person,
Mm-hmm.
the more I could be seen as somebody who knows everything and can help anybody with anything.
Yeah.
That was how I felt really valuable. And, if a lot of people were coming to me for help, then
Yeah.
that meant that I was important, and I was valuable because I knew stuff, and I knew how to solve problems. And
Yeah.
that was really huge for me. Uh,
Mm.
and it was also something that was modeled throughout my life by a lot of the women in my family.
Yeah.
So whether it was mothering, working, volunteering, like
Yeah.
whatever it was that they chose to be involved with,
Yeah.
they would do it to their absolute best. They
Yeah.
would give it all.
Yeah.
I can remember one summer in particular. My dad, he was traveling for work. He was a flight attendant,
Yeah.
and so my mum, like, she was looking after us full time.
Yeah.
And my dad was usually away 3 weeks of the month on average, so he was only home for like a week. So she did
Mm.
everything for us
Wow.
while he was away, and she felt like she needed to make her own clothes. She wouldn't buy anything for herself. She
Yeah.
felt like she had to, like, do more and more and more to validate her own value. And this
Yeah.
this one summer, she by herself cleaned, sandpapered, painted the entire outside of our house
Wow.
by herself.
It's like, am I finally worthy?
Yes, look what I
Painting
did.
away.
Am I okay? Look how much money I saved us.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I was always in awe of how much my mum could take on and how much she could give. And so
Mm.
that was part of my model of,
Mm.
what it meant to be somebody who was doing their best. Doing their
Yes.
best was a very high standard.
High standard. Yeah. If you're not painting a house by yourself over the summer, are you really doing your best? Yeah.
Yeah, like if you have any free time in a day, are
Yeah.
you really doing your best?
Are you really? And so, what has some of this work allowed you to shift or embody in terms of the values?
Mm,
You've been on this journey for a while now. Like as you talked about, like you've made some really important decisions. What are some of the values that you've embraced as a result of this truth seeking?
mm. A really cool one had to be my own health and wellness,
Yeah.
because at the point where I knew that I needed help, the physical and the mental emotional side of things
Mm,
was not great.
yeah.
So at the very core, it was, I have to be healthy and I have to be well, because it's only from that space that I'm going to be able to be a good mum, the kind of person that I want to be with
Yeah.
others. When
Mm-hmm.
I'm not physically at my best, when I'm not mentally and emotionally at my best,
Yeah.
then the relationship side of things is just not that great. You don't show up as your
Yeah.
best, and things aren't very happy.
Yeah.
So that was the core value,
Yeah.
is my own health and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Guess there were some other kind of values that I really clung on to, which seemed to be really important to me when I first started out on the journey, and I just didn't realize how important they were until going through and finding that when I actually lived those, just like how much better it made me feel.
Mm.
First one was love. So
Yeah.
being able to share love, receive love was huge
Yeah.
um, for me. Courage was another one, because
Mm.
I had for a long time dealt with a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and so just to even be able to decide to take a first step, then I
Yeah.
felt that I needed the courage to come up against that and be okay with it and keep moving through it.
Yeah.
And I mean, joy was another one.
Yeah.
So when you're continuously working yourself to the state of exhaustion, there's not a lot of room for joy.
No.
So it was making sure that I was creating opportunities and room to actually, be present and grateful for those joyous moments.
Yeah.
And further along the journey, faith was a big
Yeah.
one,
That's big.
because certainty had been such a huge need. I'd spent quite a lot of time trying to get certain around things. I'd always want things planned. I'd always want things to be known.
Mm-hmm.
And so to really, frozen two into the unknown, to take the step, you've got to take a leap.
You do.
And it's a leap
Yes.
of faith, big time.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and I'm so glad. I feel like, throughout the conversation, we've sort of weaved in certain things about giving yourself permission to rest and, we talked about busyness beforehand and how that can impact your well-being. I want to tease out two of the values that you just spoke out a little bit more, namely love and faith. At the moment, people are either discovering things that were just below the surface for some of their relationships. Maybe the pandemic has either prompted them to reflect more on their relationships, or for people who are a bit more isolated, we're also being invited to go within and reflect on the relationships that we have with ourselves. So, how has your definition or practice of love changed over the last little bit?
Again, this is a big one.
It is.
Because then you go well, what is love?
We could.
And
yes.
For me, love, when I was first thinking about it, it was in terms of romantic love or love that you have for your children or your family.
Yes.
But throughout the journey, I think the redefinition of love included things like truth, and it included things like boundaries, and it included things like just the energy that you bring to somebody else so that they feel safe. So whether you in the workplace, whether you call that love or not, I don't know, but it's that presence, I guess, or that the optimism or whatever that energy is that you bring, especially when you're separated by Skype and technology and stuff. Some people are finding that it's taking much longer for them to be able to work with other people or be able to communicate. Whereas when they were doing things in person, like if they needed to train a person in how to do something, when they were together, the nonverbal communication really helped. And so it seemed like it took less time to be able to train people. They haven't realized the impact that we have on each other. And so even if I think about love, and if I think about what I've noticed people experiencing, other people at work, they will share with me that things take longer, or that they're getting miscommunications, or that they're getting exhausted, or whatever else. And that wasn't my experience. I still felt like I was having really productive conversations with my team. I felt like after we spoke that they were more energized and clearer on what they needed to do than before. And so I think that level of presence, that level of listening, that energy and the optimism and the kinds of language that we use. So if we're having a conversation when we aren't physically together, and we start off the conversation about how challenging this is, how difficult this is, using those sorts of negative terminology, and then we're trying to get into work, it's not the same. That level of energy doesn't produce the same level of productiveness 100%. As if you start off the question, the thing of how are you? What are you loving about this time? Or if you're wearing, some people are dressing up in funky outfits, and then using that as a conversation starter. Or a great one that I love is, talking about first what's on your heart and what's on your mind, so that you can meet and be present as people first, and then move on to the task section of whatever you're trying to do. So if we're talking about love at work in this environment, the energy of how you show up, the language that you're using, and making sure that you're being present and actually being fully together as human beings before you start to try and do any work.
Yeah.
is going to show them that connection and that respect, that kind of the honoring of each other as human beings.
Yeah.
And then the productivity happens. Like it's surprising how resilient we really are. We can adapt to things,
Yeah.
and we can do things as long as our emotional side is attended to first.
That's so beautifully put. And people are, their guards are up. Because we're experiencing a moment of uncertainty, it could be that some part of the flight or fight response is more hypervigilant than normal. And
Mm,
so what I hear you saying is, by being present and creating that space of respect and deep listening and sense of honoring that other person, you're actually creating safety, and love through
mm,
that communal space. So the walls go down.
mm, mm,
And instead of forcing them to take the walls down and get on with it, you've actually won their hearts, and there's a bond between the two of you, and this common goal that you
mm.
both have. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, as far as that truth part goes, I read an article on LinkedIn which was saying that since we're at home and our cameras are on, we're getting much more insight into what people's homes look like,
Yeah.
who their children are, what their pets are, what
Yeah.
they really look like when they're not wearing makeup and just have normal clothes on.
Yeah.
And when you haven't been able to get your eyebrows waxed for the last 6 or 7 weeks or whatever else,
Yeah.
there's a lot
Yeah.
more honesty, and the professional mask is necessarily having to be dropped because you've got a
Yeah.
kid busting in
Yeah.
on your work meeting.
Yes.
And this is out of our control.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's really part of humanizing us as well. And I hope
Mm-hmm.
that we can continue that,
Mm-hmm.
remember what people were like during this
Yeah.
time, so that we can remember that they're human beings with
Mm-hmm.
pets and family and interests other
Yeah.
than just work tasks.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful.
And
Yeah.
I guess the boundaries piece, like the majority of people don't work flexi hours. This is something which only a small group of people have
That's right.
experienced and had to manage before.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people were kind of struggling with that. And it really reinforced for me that
Mm-hmm.
if people were struggling with that, then it's to do with this individual culture.
Yeah.
Because for a person working part-time to be successful in a corporate environment, they
Yeah.
need to be able to be fully transparent about the days and the times which they're working. They
Yeah.
need to be able to reinforce that with other people so that everybody knows.
Mm.
And they need to have a team which is
Mm.
working together
Yeah.
to be able to keep things moving in another person's absence.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it really just reinforced for me, when you're moving from a very individual focused
Mm-hmm.
culture
Mm-hmm.
to one where people are needing to be more flexible, and actually that team collaboration becomes
Yeah.
critical. You have to rely on other people to keep things going when you're not there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. And I'm before I ask you a little bit more about some of the things you're working on and some of the things you teach, I want to sort of set the scene a little bit. Talk about this other value that you mentioned, which is this idea of faith.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. And this is one I really fought against at the beginning.
Yeah, it's a strange thing for human beings, because usually when we have a physical threat, the
Mm,
way that we finally feel safe is if the threat has been addressed, right?
mhm,
And this is a funny one, because this isn't just an emotional threat; it's a physical one. It's in the air, if you will.
yeah.
And there are, a few of the things that are uncertain also feel like they're in the air in our lives.
Mm.
And so at the moment, it's an interesting thing, because there's not a lot that we can immediately do to get rid of it for good, forever, for everybody, for ourselves, for our loved ones.
So many unknowns.
Right? So many unknowns. And it's,
Mm,
it's a big macrocosm, some of the nature of those challenges that we go through as human beings. Sometimes things are in the air, and there's nothing that we can immediately do to make it better or to get rid of it. All of us are sort of being invited to reflect on the relationship that we have with faith and the way that we respond to uncertainty. What are some of the things that you've reflected on in your own life, in your own practice, when it comes to that?
Yeah. So control has always been like a really strong thread. Really wanting to have control, to have a plan, to have certainty.
Yeah.
Um, that was something which that was a tool in my tool bag that I really used
Yes.
to great effect and
Yeah.
to detrimental effect.
Mm-hmm.
Faith for me has been trying to understand if there's something that's out of my control that to me initially seems very scary,
Mm. Yeah.
because how can I make sure that my plan is executed, right? How can I
Yeah.
get to my imagined
Mm-hmm.
future state?
Yeah.
Because this has always been like, as the achiever, this
Oh,
has
yeah.
always been the thing, right? I
Yeah.
know where I am now and I know where
Mm-hmm.
I want to be.
Yes.
So as long as I can have a clear plan on how I work towards that thing,
Yeah.
then I'm okay. But if
And
the
I'm
plan becomes unclear or if unexpected things happen,
mm.
then that would really derail me big
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And faith was about asking myself the question,
Mm.
what if there's a different plan that's not my plan
Yeah.
that could actually be better than my plan?
Yes.
What if, like, how would I know if I was on track on that different plan, the bigger plan?
Mm. Yeah.
How would I know? Like, I guess it would feel really good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I could imagine that there's a bigger plan, and I can imagine that if something really feels good, then it means that I'm on track on that plan.
Mm-hmm.
But then the discomfort comes up of like, okay, but then you're only going to know the immediate step in front of you,
That's right. Yeah.
and you're not going to know all the subsequent steps, and you don't know where you're going to end up.
That's right. Yeah.
So then it's like, well, can I just trust that there's some benevolent force or some path that's already been laid out for me
Yeah.
that could be really good,
Yeah.
as long as I don't need to know all of the steps
Yes.
and I just focus on the one in front of me,
Yeah.
then I could be pleasantly surprised
Yeah.
with like opportunities I could never have thought of,
Yeah.
or a life which is so much more like in tune with who I really am and what I want.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds like that could be good.
Yeah.
Like, is that worth giving up the little plan for?
For.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it could be. Especially if the cost of having that little plan means that every time that something doesn't go according to plan, I
Mm-hmm.
get totally derailed and feel disappointed or not good enough, or start beating myself up.
Yeah. Beautiful.
It's like, well, if I only do that, the going into a dark hole
Yep.
of beating myself up and
Yep.
telling myself that I didn't achieve my plan and I didn't take, this step didn't happen. And so it means all these bad things about me. Like,
Yeah.
if I can just let go of wanting to do that to myself,
Mm-hmm.
then I might just like lighten things up a bit,
Yeah.
come back to trust,
Yeah.
come back to the next step,
Mm-hmm.
and just let the rest go.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So many things I heard in that which are useful. Like often the judgment or the anxiety is given a meaning about who we are. So it's
Mm,
not enough that we don't know it. It means that we're terrible or that we've failed. So
mm,
there's like an added layer. So it's like the grief or the anxiety, it sort of doubles because you have the
absolutely.
uncertainty and then you have the judgment about being uncertain. That can be a really painful road to have that feeling every time you're uncertain when we don't
Mm,
actually know anything beyond the moment.
yeah. And
Yeah.
especially when I really wanted to start taking steps, like when I wanted to start getting into some of the more creative things or things which were more personally meaningful to me, there
Yeah.
was an element of perfectionism showing up.
Mm.
And for me, perfectionism shows up when I believe that there's a right wrong.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yes.
if I really think that there's like a pass fail here,
Yeah.
then I'm going to get into that, second guessing myself or
Mm-hmm.
being overly critical or trying to make something that's a little bit more, acceptable to others rather than what's actually really true for me.
Yeah.
And so when I start to feel that little piece
Yeah.
coming up,
Yeah.
the thing about faith is that there's no right and wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's only what's true and feels good for you internally. Like it's about going back inside and listening
Mm-hmm.
and getting clear on what's actually really important and what's really true to the heart and authentic,
Yeah.
rather than thinking that there's anything that you could possibly do that is wrong, because it's all just about learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like, give life some credit to think that there are only two options, either this one or that one. It's
Yeah.
definitely just those two. If we stay open to some of the wonder about life's possibilities, curb that black or white thinking, we can sort of have a much deeper sense of gratitude and love of life that
Mm,
comes from, knowing what all those other possibilities could be.
definitely. And the power of imagination, I think, is
Yeah.
is starting to really show up for me at the moment, and lots of things that I'm
Yes.
thinking about. And it's something which I, in my professional work role, I would
Yeah.
have really disparaged imagination. It was much
Yeah.
more, being serious was like the
Mm-hmm.
proper adult way to be,
Yeah.
and imagination is something within the realm of like the childhood stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
But having the freedom to really kind of relax and give yourself a bit of time to just,
Yeah.
reflection, and whether you call it, meditation or mindfulness or whatever, but just to let the mind kind of do its thing and see
Yeah.
what it comes up with.
Yeah.
It's very, it's freeing, and it's energizing, and there's some really interesting connections that your mind can make that you might not have come up with before if you were dealing with things in the more analytical sort of frame.
Yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit more about that in terms of the approach, or the how, if you will, in a second. When I first met you, there were so many things or questions that you were navigating at the time. You've mentioned some of them today, namely your health and wellness, looking deeper into who you are, what's authentic for you, bringing more joy, more courage, and living from the heart into your life. You mentioned that there are lots of tiny decisions, many
Mm.
decisions that you've made along the way, and I'm so proud of you for making these decisions over time. I'd love for people to know just every day, like what those decisions are that help you live this work.
Mm, so many.
Yeah.
Uh, all right. So, like, first thing in the morning, waking up and doing like a bit of a check in with self,
Yeah.
and just asking myself, how am I doing today? And
Mm,
that's something, checking in with myself throughout the day,
yeah.
is something which really helps me to figure out, is the plan that I have for today still right for me? Do
Yeah.
I need to make some adjustments, or do I need to ask for help, or do I need to change what I originally planned in order to be able to maintain that kind of sense of balance and center?
Yeah.
Because I think on the one hand, I've got the idea of each day and what is planned to do,
Yeah.
and then there's the actual reality of how you feel on any given day.
Yes.
So that self checking is really, it's an important one,
Mm,
first thing and throughout the day.
yes.
Another one would be along the lines of like, how do I want to show up with others? So
Mm,
being really clear, depending on the kind of call that I'm on, or whether I'm playing with my children or having time with my husband. What do I actually want out of that? How do I want them to feel? How do I want to show up in order to be able to have the kind of relationship with that person that is fulfilling for me and for them?
Yeah.
Like reflecting on times throughout the day when I might have like gone a bit off track, gone a bit like unconscious, or slipped into patterns of behavior that don't serve. So like trying to just be as mindful as possible of times where I slipped into, criticizing myself or others, blaming, doing that thing where you kind of weigh up, like, how much have I done versus how much has somebody else done? Like that
a transaction,
kind of relationship accounting.
A spreadsheet, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's like, do they owe me something? Do I owe them something? When I'm starting to get into that transactional way of seeing things, I know that's a bit of a red flag for me, that I need to take a little bit more self-care, or I need to think about something which might have triggered me and journal it or somehow express it, write it out, whatever. For me, like eating has always been a pattern. Like I know if I'm starting to go to the fridge or the pantry totally unconsciously, show up and open the pantry and just be like, why am I here? I don't know, but there's cereal, so why not?
Why not?
That's usually a trigger that I need to sort of take a step back and sort of see, like, okay, what happened before that? Like, is there something which has pushed a button for me, or like just what's going on? But yeah, as far as like the decisions that I think have really made a difference have been decisions to be honest, not just with myself, but with other people. So times when I've needed to have a discussion with my husband to say, hey, this is kind of not working for me. I mean, the start of lockdown was a really important time for both of us, because we had to be really clear, like within the constraints of what we were working with, having to have 2 kids at home while I was also working and wanting to have creative time and downtime, and while he was also working on recovering an injury and getting his physical fitness and well-being back up to where he wanted it to be. But also I wanted him to take more responsibility for the kids and help out more with the housework. So there was a bit of a conversation that we needed to have about the kinds of outcomes that we wanted and what we could do to sort of figure it out together, as to how we could balance the things that we needed to do. Because we couldn't just, Alison wasn't just going to kindy, so we didn't have that time during the day. Like, we actually had to do everything ourselves. And so that was a really important discussion, which meant that I got more, I guess, of what I had wanted previously, but hadn't felt justified to ask for, because I had this idea in my mind about what a mum did. A mum doesn't just lock herself in a room for half a day to work on a book. She doesn't. That's a frivolous idea. Like, if you're not working, then obviously you need to do housework and childcare, because that's your job, right?
Yeah. What I'm hearing is, like, first of all, that you have a really sort of moment-to-moment relationship with your intuition. Like, the two of you are talking throughout the day, and you're checking in with how you are, and, there's a deep sense of self-awareness in terms of how you're showing up for other people. And something else that I'm noticing is that sense of compassion. It's not that there's this false illusion that nothing ever goes wrong and we do the things every day all the time. It's this, that there's this self-compassion and self-love that allows you to move away. If you are opening the fridge and if there is cereal, that there's enough of a lovely inner dialogue happening that you can make a different choice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not about the cereal.
Yeah, it's not.
Like, I'm looking at the cereal. I'm thinking, I need the cereal. I want the cereal. And it's like, it's not about the cereal.
It's not.
What is it about?
Yeah, beautiful. I feel like this leads us so nicely into this idea of looking to different teachers. You talked about the mind, you've talked about the imagination, you've talked about sort of like an integrated way of doing this work.
Mm,
There's sometimes a bias in the transformational space about getting everything done, doing everything
mm,
consistently, just this sense of permanence that we have with rituals and outcomes.
mm.
Yeah. So when we talk about this work, living heart-centered or living authentic lives, if you will, how is it different, or how does it add to other coaching or other forms of mentoring that is a bit dominant in this space?
Absolutely. So if I think about, one of the one of the teachers which I really got into quite a bit was Tony Robbins. So I was
Yeah.
watching all the videos and
You and
seeing
I
just the
both.
amazing transformations that appeared to happen. Like as soon as the conversation or the intervention was finished, then everything was fixed, seemingly.
Yes.
Um, and going like, okay, so you can just, that can be a big bang. You can fix it and it's done.
Yeah.
And so I bought into that, and I thought that if I could just be more consistent, if I could just be more like rigid in
Hmm.
what I did and how I did it, and
Yeah.
more scheduled, then it would happen.
Yeah.
But I had to go through the grief, I guess, of learning that for me that wasn't true. And
Yeah.
no matter how much I would like beat myself up to try and be consistent in whatever the morning practices were, or the ways of doing things, the planning, whatever,
Yeah.
that I would inevitably rebel against it, or I would have a day where I had such low energy that I just couldn't bring myself to, or I would have so much resistance, like the fear, uncertainty, and
Mm.
doubt coming up, that it would be like an all or nothing.
Yeah.
It was either like a big push or a like at home in bed,
Yeah.
you know?
Yes. Yeah.
And then the added shame on top of that of like all these people are experiencing all the benefits and doing it all properly. So
Yeah.
there's obviously something wrong with me, that it's not working.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and this, a big part of the journey, I guess, was about coming back to that humanness of,
Mm.
we all have different days. I mean, for women, especially throughout the month, you feel different week
Yes.
to week,
Yeah.
day to day.
Moment to moment. Yes.
Yeah. And
Um,
so I guess making peace with that and
yeah.
figuring out how to work with it instead of against it,
Yeah.
and figuring out that if there's a pattern of behavior that's coming up, or a particular thinking pattern, that it's not some kind of weakness, and it's
Yeah.
not something that, it's not like a fake it till you make it, or like a push through.
Yeah.
It's more about actually like seeing what's underneath,
Yeah.
and seeing what's coming up to be witnessed and healed potentially.
Yeah.
Because I mean, from the stuff to do with the mind body connection, and then neuro, um, all the brain science stuff,
Yeah.
it basically says that in order to rewire your brain, in order to create a new pattern and to rewire it, even once you've healed the wound and you've understood where it's come from and you've given yourself compassion, but in order to do that rewiring,
Mm-hmm.
you need to repeat the old pattern at least one more time, so
Mm.
that you can see yourself doing it. You bring a different kind of consciousness to it,
Yeah.
so that next time you'll catch yourself a little bit earlier, a little bit earlier, a little bit earlier,
Mm-hmm.
until you break the pattern and you have the new way of doing things.
Mm.
That kind of pruning of like
Mm-hmm.
pruning the old way and having the new
Yeah.
neural pathways operating. That's
Yeah.
a process which takes repetition. And
Mm-hmm.
so just because I do my old program again, if I can see it, and if I
Yeah.
can keep seeing it a little bit earlier, a little bit earlier, a little bit earlier, and then actually see it while I'm doing it,
Yeah.
then you're at the point where you're almost about to prune it.
Oh, yeah.
So that compassion of when I repeat a pattern, just reminding myself, like, okay, you've seen it now. You need to do it at least one more time before you can break this thing.
Yeah. It's incredible. And I feel like you've described the process so well And I think, like how I relate to it is that you're describing the process of nature. There's something gradual about the way that you're creating that shift. You know, there isn't something one and done. You know, it's more in alignment with the way that human beings are in terms of our nature. Like,
Yeah, and if you've got the process, like if you
yeah,
understand the process of how to do that in yourself and what to look for in yourself,
yes,
then whatever comes up in life, you've
yeah,
got that process to fall back on. So it will stay with you forever. So, you know, if the one and done thing was true, I would need to keep going back
yeah,
to get that fix every
fix.
time I experience something new.
Yeah, you're so right. Because so much of our lives is spent in our own company. It's just you with your thoughts in your body. You know, it's like, yes, like when we're with other people, we're present with them. But in terms of the company we keep, it's just, it's you in terms of the dialogue and the thoughts and the feelings and the things that are happening within.
Mm.
So you're so right. Like with this idea of uh, loving and having compassion for imperfection and finding a sustainable process that creates that shift.
Mm.
Yeah, makes sure that it's integrated and it becomes part of who you are.
Mm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. And you know, I'm very curious. I'm so glad you're in this world doing what you're doing, and also that you're in leadership, you know, um, teaching people these principles, the work that you've done over the last few years. And I also want to know, like, what are some of the things you are working on? And then I'll get into a little bit more about your vision for leadership.
Yeah. So there's two things at the moment which are, I
Yeah,
guess, in my creative sphere.
yeah,
One is that there's a coach colleague which I worked with him about 10 years ago, and
yeah,
his his problem solving process and his thinking process I found really intriguing, and he also came across to me as a really heart-centered kind of person.
yeah,
Like he really cared about people and making a difference, and that to me is all I need to know about somebody, to know that
yeah,
they're a good person that I want to keep in touch with.
yeah.
So
Beautiful.
we kept in touch over the years, but this year we both found ourselves with the same question,
Mm,
and that is, how do you communicate
mm,
the need for some of these things in business when the language of business is about competition and battle, and it's
yeah,
a totally different paradigm or a different level of consciousness, whatever you want to call it.
yeah,
And when you try to talk from the level of conscious language that you are,
yeah,
you just can't understand each other. Like I can't understand why they continue to see the world the way they do. They can't understand why I see the world the way that I do, and
mm,
you just can't connect.
yeah,
And so the question that I started to discuss with Carl was, how do you how do you find a way of finding a common language so that you can
mm,
actually connect and understand each other?
yeah, yeah,
Uh, and so one of the ways that we came up with is that there is like a common language throughout humanity, and that's the language of story,
that's right.
and being able to put yourself into a story and to be able to really learn through metaphor and through the challenges that the characters face,
Mm,
to be able to learn something and to be able to learn a new language through it as well. So we can inject different language in the book. We can start out with the language of competition, and we can move it through to the language of like human collaboration
yeah,
and all of that good stuff, trust, all that good stuff.
yeah,
And so we decided to collaborate on a book, and it's going to be a novel with an executive team who are facing many of the same challenges that we all face. You know, different personalities, different different wounds, different ways of working, and they're all sort of in conflict with each other because they each have their own individual interests that they're trying to pursue,
yeah,
which are usually at the detriment of others. So, you know, CFO usually wants to make things really efficient and focus on cost cutting. The person who is involved with operations is much more focused on process and customer. And then you've got your HR person who's very focused on people and development. And you've got a CEO who's got the demands of the board, who somehow needs to balance everything. But, based on the industrial age paradigm, the language of the business has been accounting and finance. And so that's always given primacy or priority because it's measurable, and you can review it over time, and it just provides a lot more certainty.
Yes.
Because it's much more difficult to measure things like, customer satisfaction and culture.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do in this book is to almost do it as like a case study, but make it really like engaging and bring in the power of story and these different personalities to take readers on a journey of business transformation. Yeah. So how do you understand like the problems that these characters are facing and the conflict that they're having? Yeah. How do you figure out like how to create the moments in the book where each of them thinks like there must be a better way, and their brain starts looking for metaphors and symbols, and we end up using the metaphor of music, so bringing harmony to workplace, so bringing these different disharmonious pieces together into more of a harmonious or collaborative way of working, and being able to show the shift that the leader goes through, that the CEO, he's actually the main obstacle. If he doesn't shift, then nobody else underneath can shift. Yeah. And then just showing a kind of a group problem solving process that they can use as far as certain questions that they can use. So, why do we want to change? What do we want to change to? How do we get there? And being able to put all of these characters, being able to put all of their concerns and reservations on the table and show that by putting on the table all of our concerns and our dreams and our hopes, you can problem solve that collaboratively and come out with a really amazing answer, which is going to meet everybody's interests. So it's showing like this is possible. You can have everything. You just need to take off the armor first.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, I'm so excited for that. And what I'm hearing, or when you speak about this premise, the central thing that binds everything is this music, this harmony. It's so beautiful because it's about bringing together the best of each other instead of creating that separation. What I'm seeing in this work is you showing how possible it is, or how the best of us are created when we embrace the best of what we are and the best of what other people bring.
Absolutely. And we focus so much on differences and the things that we disagree on, but actually there are many things that we have in common. And so finding the commonalities or the common threads which you can then build on to create that harmony is really valuable.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So we've talked about like different threads of leadership. We've talked about humanity. We've talked about harmony. Are there like some other principles that you really know would change leadership for the better?
Well, I guess reflecting on my own experience, the last mask, after doing the inner work and really coming to myself as like knowing who I am and how I want to show up as a leader. The last mask is just still, there's this little piece of self-doubt which shows up every now and again. And I notice it particularly when people start using a lot of like business language. When it's like a defense mechanism that some people go to, there are certain terminologies that people use and certain things that people go back to like reinforce their view of the world.
Oh yeah.
And so I've really started to focus on the kinds of language that people are using, because as soon as that sort of like business language showed up, the kind of idea that would come into my head is like, oh, well, I just don't get, like, business is just like this. And I somehow am too idealistic, unrealistic, naive to believe that things could be a better way. And so what they're saying could be true and I might be wrong. And so for me, taking off that kind of last one is about being able, like, not feeling bad about starting with the language that they're using, but like then reframing it back to a different kind of metaphor or a different kind of example. I guess that's the other piece of communicating or speaking their language, is about just accepting fully where they are now. Like, I'm not going to try and convert them because I cannot convert them in this instance. But we need to be able to communicate. So I need to be able to be very aware of the language that they're using and to be able to then shift it into a different kind of language or a different kind of example, so that we can communicate. And even if they disagree, then at least I know that I've still stood in my integrity. I've still given my point of view, and it's all right if it's different.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. And I think it's like in terms of that, I suppose this vision that you have for leadership, and for any of us like heart-centered people who are in leadership roles or are in the position of influencing and guiding leaders, what do we need to believe about what we have to say and what we have to bring to the table?
So important. It's so important. Like, a really good example. So I was doing a piece of work with another person who's pretty much at the same rank as me, but I hadn't worked with her before, and we didn't know each other very well, and we'd only interacted a few times, so we hadn't really built up a lot of trust. And we had to take a client call where I knew that she was going to be leading the call, so she was going to be very much kind of like in charge of the conversation. But from relatively early in the conversation, I realized that there was a bit of like a competitive or a defensive vibe going on, where, you know, she was trying to put forward a certain agenda and get a certain outcome, and the client was trying to communicate like a more complex reality than we'd originally assumed. And there was this energy of, like, the conversation was really separating kind of devolving. And my initial reaction was like, I don't want to say something because I don't want to piss off this other person who I'm still trying to build trust with. But I also don't want to leave the client feeling like we don't understand what they're saying, because if that relationship gets detrimentally impacted, then the whole project could be impacted. And so that decision to kind of step in and to say something, it was scary at first, but the decision to do it was right, because when we change the conversation to one that is more empathic, so like I hear what you're saying, and being able to show that you've really listened and you've really understood some of the complexities of what they're trying to understand, what they're trying to tell you, and to help them see how the work that you can do is actually going to help them to achieve whatever it is that they're trying to achieve, or raise a concern that they've been trying to raise but haven't been heard, it's not been listened to. That it was like 2 sentences that it immediately shifted the conversation, and after that they told us everything we wanted to know. They gave us all the information that we needed to be able to move forward with the project.
Amazing.
And I feel like the trust was really built there, that they felt like they could raise concerns and be able to share things, and that we weren't there to be like the cops and like tell them what's good and bad or whatever else, that we're actually there to help, and that we're there to do the right thing. If we continue to use this competitive paradigm, we're going to continue to stay separate. We're going to continue to push people's buttons and put them into defensive mode.
Mm.
We're going to continue to be like unexpectedly shocked by people's bad behavior when it finally bubbles up because they can't repress it anymore.
Yeah.
All this stuff is going to stop us from being able to meet our business and personal objectives.
Yeah.
But it's also just going to continue this whole culture that we have around, scarcity and separation, and like there's no need for it. There's really no need.
Yeah.
The outcomes across everything are so much better when we can build trust, when we can, be honest, when we can have conflict, or if you want to call it, that constructive challenge to make sure that all the information is out and we can actually, move forward from a practical and, having all the information is a really important part of making good decisions.
Yeah.
So
yes.
As far as like people engagement, business outcomes, customer satisfaction, it's all there. Business is human.
Yes.
When people are in pain, business is in pain.
Yes, absolutely. That's the heart of it. This vision of business as something that acknowledges and responds to its humanity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. And I suppose it's like something that I really associate with you, and I introduced you as this, is this sort of beauty that you find in digging for the truth and knowing the truth and living the truth. And so I want to know a little bit more about your why, So we've talked so much about what you want to create in your book and the vision that you have, but what's like a deeper why about your life? What are you here to give and experience and create?
Yeah. So truth and beauty are definitely two things which come up.
Yeah.
But the thing which I'm playing with at the moment and where the harmony piece really fits in is that I want to be able to just harmonize with humanity's song.
Aww.
And the song of humanity is everything. It's the joys and the triumphs, but it's also the struggle and the sadness. It's the ups and the downs and everything in between. And so I want to be able to be present to my own fullness, whatever that looks like, even if it's hard, because I know that that's the only way to be able to fully experience all of the light and all of the joy and all of the fun and freedom that there is. And if I can do that for myself, then I can do it with and for others as well.
Yeah,
and that's the whole point.
Beautiful. This is music to my ears.
Harmonize, right?
Yeah, like I said, I honor you so much. I'm so proud of you, and I'm just grateful that I know and get to be part of seeing you impact so many lives. And I just really want to honor just what an incredible journey you've had and the courage with which you've embraced it. Just such a privilege to know who you are. So thank you.
Yeah, it's been what feels like a long road some days.
Yes.
And I'm just so glad that our paths crossed because you've been an amazing teacher for me as well. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yay. I feel like this is a wonderful note to end on, to encourage people to embrace the song and the light and the shadow, and not only for themselves, but give others the permission to do the same.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to give you like a virtual hug.
Oh, yay. I feel it.
Oh, wonderful. Bye. How was that?
That was fun. Why can't all conversations be like that?
Boom. That was my entire idea for this.
Get into the heart. How do you do that thing? That thing like that kind of.
Yeah.
Eats out.
Wonderful. I will see you on Wednesday. Next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday. I was like, what day is today?
Today is April 97th. Yes. All right. Till then.
Bye.
Bye.